still in that space, I invite you to move in your imagination to one of those spots in nature where you feel the connection. Just for a moment, just feel how wonderful it is to know the beauty, the life, the joy, the ease. There might be a spot in the woods or on the beach in the mountains that calls you. And now what I'd like to invite you to do is, from that snapshot moment, allow yourself to move through time in that place. Feel what's happening as the seasons begin to change. Feel the leaves and the flowers as they're changing, and the animals as they're doing different things in different seasons. Be aware of that shift. And then allow another season. Feel the shifts and the changes there. And yet another. And if you allow yourself, you can be in a spot where you can sort of fast forward and you feel like the seasons of the earth are your breathing. And take it in, and you breathe it out. The earth is breathing. There's a wonderful video online, a graphic of the snows across the poles. And it's just maintained at that speed of the breathing. The snow increases in the winters and it pulls back in the summers. The earth's seasons and our breathing are one and the same, just slightly different scale. And so I invite you now to bring your attention back to this room. And I'm going to open with a remark from a man who we have used the Latin version of his name far too many years, Confucius. We've said Confucius. Confucius. He was on the planet at the same time as another master, Lao Tzu. That name means ancient master. It was not his name. But what Confucius tells us, which is very much in alignment with what Lao Tzu would say, he who is in harmony with nature hits the mark without effort and apprehends truth without thinking. Yeah? So as UUs, we're encouraged to, search for truth and meaning. And we're also encouraged to connect with that interconnected web of life that we're a part of. And when you combine these two, you're perilously close to being indigenous peoples. Wonderfully close. To find the truth and the meaning and feel the connectedness of all life and being. As we go in one direction, we're taken into the analytical. As we go into the feeling, the connection, we start going into a harmonious, heartfelt experience. And as we do this, we're aware that this process is happening, this harmonizing is happening both around us and within us. And I'd like to explore some of the ways that people have talked about that with you. There's a young man who studied at Reed College. He wrote a book called Prayer and the Art of Volkswagen Maintenance. Motorcycle maintenance. Volkswagen maintenance.
That was a different book.
Yeah. It's an interesting, he's putting together 3 or 4 different concepts there. His name is Donald Miller, I don't know him. But he says, the seasons remind me I must keep changing. It's so easy to get fixed and think we can be fixed in a point and in a pattern and repeat the same things over and over again. Yeah. A fundamental principle of systems theory is that change is the only constant.
Yes.
Right. Isn't that marvelous? Yes. And if I may share something Linda shared with me, she received an email from a colleague putting together a program in Newport, and the description included the reminder that when the leaves are falling, they're helping us to understand we can let go of the things that are not going to serve us in the next season, without damaging ourselves at all. There's a marvelous futurist. She does trends forecasting. Her name is Christina Drija. Okay? And she wrote a novel called Grace in the Wind, which has a lovely little website on it. And she says the cycles of nature guide our lives, and their wisdom can be our wisdom too. We often forget that our body is part of the body of the universe. And so when we begin to integrate and live the movements of the cosmos within our own selves, our lives begin to take on the same natural flow. You can relax into it. She says seasonal, circadian, lunar, and tidal movements influence our lives in profound ways if only we can let them in and trust their intelligence. You know, those of us who grew up in this country or in any urban or suburban environment have been trained to think nature is something out there to be controlled and to be, left alone if at all possible if you grew up in an urban environment, right? There's a woman named Sarah Eisenberger. She's a rabbi, and she talks about moving through the year as a spiritual practice. Marvelous woman. And she says, in September, my body has begun to register the shorter days. 7:15 and it's already getting dark. Mornings get to be a little sneezy and congested as pollination gets underway and leaf mold growth accelerates. The garden's beginning to look worn and dried out, reviving only momentarily with the rains of the season. And the apples hang so heavily they pull the branches toward the ground, but are not yet ripe enough for picking. But that's one calendar. And then she says, there's a collision of calendars. The school calendar comes along. Labor Day approaches. I have a commanding sense that playtime is over and it's time to get down to work. Now, as someone who went to school for 32 years, I can relate to this, right? So I revisit work plans made way back last spring and adjust them for what I can see now that I couldn't see then, for what I can live now that I couldn't live then. And then she says, the winds and the storms of the election year calendar spread troubling waters across my landscape, and I respond by keeping my eye on a near horizon that I have set. The last polling place closes on November 8th. But she's a rabbi, and it's September. So she says, but the calendar at the forefront for me at this time of year is the Jewish liturgical one. The new moon signals the beginning of the month of Elul and the High Holy Day season that will end in mid-October. The month of Elul invites me into an extended personal examination of conscience and behavior through the practice of accounting of the soul. Experience has taught me that whatever preparation I undertake now will shape my journey through the whole season. Overlook the opportunities for conscious change, and any efforts to move in those directions will be much harder during the rest of the year. How can this be? Can there really be a season for change? Isn't that a lovely idea? And the last time I was here, I talked about the High Holy Days. We were in the middle of them. And that was wonderful, and that whole beautiful experience for all the Jewish families and all of us who were affected by Jewish families. But this week we're leading up to yet another New Year. This is the week we lead up to Samhain, and I'm trusting that Min and Sally are going to give you a marvelous experience of that. The Celtic peoples all across the world are celebrating the end of the harvest and the beginning of the new year at the end of this month, the next weekend. So this really is kind of a season for change. We've got 3 New Years between September and December, right? And we're all saying, there's something that is completing, a fulfillment that has happened. And now we're beginning to kind of curl up and go inside and begin to think about something new. Now with Samhain and what we call Halloween and what the Hispanics call the Day of the Dead, we're talking about not only the ending of the physical harvest, the ending of the foods and all of that coming in and being stored, but we're also talking about those who have ended their life, the harvest of their life. And so there's a dimension beyond the physical in this time that is, where we have with the Jewish tradition looked at the higher, spiritual connection with all that is. Now we're looking at what some people might call the lower, but I would call the expansive connection with all the beings that are, right? And so it's a marvelous, marvelous shift as we come to the end of the month of October. And the colors for Samhain and for this season are the colors of the fall, right? The oranges and the deep reds and browns, and plus the color of the night. We see a lot more black in this time, don't we? And in this Samhain, what we're looking at is not only honoring what has been, but opening to what could be. And if you were to practice Samhain, you would have a black candle. And in the black candle, you would light and then burn little tiny bits of paper that are the being done with, the releasing, just as the trees are releasing. So in all these ways, for thousands of years, humanity has honored the shifting of the seasons as a turning in our lives and in our hearts and in our souls as well. We do this in the autumn, and as the planet does its journey around the sun, we wake up into the depths of winter and we feel the snows and that special light that only happens in winter, even if there isn't any snow. Isn't that marvelous? As the sun is so low in the sky. Khalil Gibran in The Prophet says, accept the seasons of your heart, even as you have always accepted the seasons across the fields. As you do so, you will watch with serenity through the winters of your grief. Recognizing this is a season, it passes. It's a part of a cycle. And so in most traditional scriptures, we read phrases like, and it came to pass, right? And, we are reminded in the depths of our distress, this too shall pass. And if you have ever had a Hindu guru, and you come to him and you say, oh, I'm so happy, I've had this incredible experience, he says, it's okay, this too will pass. That futurist who wrote Grace in the Wind tells us, put simply, rhythm is fundamental to well-being. It is the keynote of nature, not just a sign of life. It is life. Rhythm is life. The solid things that we create don't move much. They're not alive. They may have a form of consciousness, but they are not living beings. Part of being alive is having rhythm, following the rhythm, allowing the natural rhythm of our being. Remembering, she says, that we are nature reconnects us to everything else. It returns us to our essence, as we sang in the song. Thank you, that was a perfect choice for me. Nature's rhythms are the key to feeling in sync with life. But this is not an intellectual exercise. And there we go. We can either go play with it in our head, or we can feel it with our heart and mind. We feel it in our bodies. Yeah? So to familiarize ourselves with the flow of life, to feel, she says, the sea of energies means allowing, not forcing. We've been raised in a culture that teaches us we must make things happen. We must control things to be safe. We must make it fit our idea of what is right. But allowing, trusting, there's a truth here. There's a deep meaning here that we can only find in the process of allowing that harmony to happen. We can't find it by figuring it out. We can't find it by directing it. We can't find it by saying, I'm going to do this and then this and then this and then this. No. Now, some of you have been in enough of my classes to remember Ruth's 3 E's. The first one is, these are the E's for effectiveness, okay? If we're going to be effective, we need to choose that which is most of all enjoyable. It is something in which we find joy. Enjoy. And the second thing is that it is effortless. We don't have to push ourselves to do it. If I have to push myself to do something, I'm not going to be very effective at it. And the final thing is, I get energized by it. It is energizing. So effortless is 3 E's. Effectiveness is 3 E's. Effortless, enjoyable, and energizing. Can you see there's an element of allowing in all of that? An element of trusting, of realizing that if I push myself to do this, it's because I don't trust that I can do this in my own time, in my own way, and it will be done just fine. So if we begin to allow the natural rhythms of our own being, if we begin to allow ourselves to realize that our own being, those natural rhythms are the same rhythms as the rhythms of the earth, the seasons and the diurnal and the lunar cycles and the solar cycles. If we can begin to allow the realization that I can move with that and allow that and trust that, I begin to get to a deeper place in my own spiritual and physical and intellectual understanding. Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, the guy who did the autobiography of a yogi, says, harmony with nature will bring you happiness that's known to few city dwellers. Because the city we live, in the city we live from that conflict, from that pressure, from that that directive. Okay? We're removed as far as possible in the city from natural cycles. That's the whole point of the city, is to protect and control this natural process that is seen as somehow something we're supposed to fight. Yeah. I was very fortunate in that even though my normal home growing up was a third-floor walk-up apartment, my summers were on a farm. And my favorite place to sleep was the screened-in porch. And the kittens would crawl all over me all night. I was in charge of the kittens. That, being in that space, and the crickets and the breezes and the rain or the not the rain and the light and then the stars and the moon or the not the moon, all of that was so important to my feeling and knowing who I was. And the bedroom that I slept in when I was in town, I had lots of windows on the east and the south side, so the moon rising was part of my life. She was my best friend as an only child of a single mom on a third-floor walk-up apartment. There's a wonderful set of websites having to do with living with the Mother Earth, and Carol Vanolia writes them for them. And she says, these days most of us tend to be out of sync. Indeed, yes. How many of us know what phase the moon is in right now? How many of us know where the tides are right now? We get, she says, too little sleep. We awaken by an alarm clock, jumpstart ourselves with caffeine and sugar, work indoors under steady levels of electric light all day and into the evening. I know people who are retired who live this way. Nobody here, though. And then we have difficulty sleeping, she says. Not only are we out of harmony with the sun and the moon, but our complex biological functions are getting out of phase with each other. She says we're missing the portion of the sun spectrum that is vital in triggering the production of a proper chemical balance of melatonin and serotonin. I know people who make it a point at sunset, once the sun is below 45 degrees, it's safe to do this, to stare at the sun, to allow themselves to feel and to be renewed by, to develop more vitamin D, and to restore the balance of serotonin and melatonin. She says when this desynchronization occurs, our health declines. We may become tired, depressed, anxious. Our sleep may be disturbed. Digestion and metabolism can be thrown off. And we can generally become more vulnerable. Now, if there is one thing that our culture has been doing to us for some days now, some months, perhaps some centuries, but certainly the last years, it's been to encourage us to be vulnerable. Vulnerable to advertisement, vulnerable to fear projected in the media, vulnerable in many different ways, and we all feel it. What this remarkable woman is suggesting is we don't have to feel that way anymore. And her notion is connect with nature. And that sense of vulnerability begins to go. Now, for those of us who grew up in a city, that's pushing it a little bit. You want me to go for a walk in the woods to not feel vulnerable? Right. Bears, snakes, ticks. Are you kidding me? So to begin to be able to do that, we have to take baby steps, eh? Baby steps. A walk on the beach maybe instead of in the forest. Right? Something that feels effortless, enjoyable, and energizing. Not a big thing out there, yeah? There's a brain researcher at Scripps, his name's James Cahill. Some of you may have heard of Jim Cahill's work. He's done a lot of work with biofeedback, and he reminds us that there's a huge amount of research that tells us if we can just allow ourselves to appreciate a natural landscape, all kinds of interesting things happen to our biological, our complex biological system, right? There's a marvelous relaxing that begins to happen. Hormones begin to fall into place. It's not as much as if you were going into deep meditation, but it's a considerable, significant difference just contemplating a natural landscape. And there's been lots of studies that say, you know what the highest, most effective natural landscape is? A meadow with a few trees. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I discovered that when I was doing nuclear power plant siting studies. I was trying to prevent them from getting sited. And that was one of the things we were using was, okay, if you've got this in place, don't put a power plant there. So just allowing ourselves to slow down a bit, to contemplate natural processes and beauty, to feel that happens, and to feel that connection that is the next stage in that. Now, if you need an excuse, turns out there's a science you can do. It's the science of phenology. I discovered this while I was preparing for this talk. I had no idea. We have a science of monitoring when the sun is rising, when it's going down, what the trees are doing, what the flowers are doing, what the critters are doing. It's an extension of ecology, but Thomas Jefferson did it, right? And if we, our wonderful favorite Thoreau did it, Henry David Thoreau also would daily keep a track of this is what's happening today. And it's the basis for the Farmer's Almanac. Phenology.
PH or F?
It's pH, same basis as phenome. It's the Greek appearance, pheno, and ology, study. Yeah? So, you can give yourself the excuse. Go out and check the leaves. Go out and check the tide. Go out and check the sunset and the sunrise. And you can become part of the National Association of Phenologists, and you can become a recording station. Now there's a slight danger here, because when we start dealing with numbers and figures and comparisons, what happens? We get back in that left brain again, We get back in that analytical control evaluation base. So, watch it, see what happens. You want to be feeling and allowing and trusting. There are terms for various things. We can do some daylighting. Daylighting is allowing the light from outside to light your space. Passive solar heating, having a space where the sun pours in to heat your space instead of the central air conditioning HVAC system. Creating outdoor living spaces, that's a little iffy, but here we're getting more and more days where we can do things like that. And some people have created these wonderful artistic canopies so they can be outside even if it's showering a little bit. You can gradually awaken with the sun. There is only one day in any period of time when I have an alarm clock. Sunday morning. Most of the time I'm awake, but I make sure that I don't oversleep on Sunday morning. If we can gradually allow ourselves to awaken with the light, there are alarm clocks that artificially do this, right? But if we can feel that light emerging, I was aware for a while this summer that the first sound in the morning was the crows cawing. And that wasn't very pleasant, so I'd roll over and go back to sleep until the doves started. When we work near windows, when we get outdoors during the day, when we turn the lights down as we're moving toward bedtime, we're beginning to allow the natural rhythms of our body to be in sync with the world around us. And then something magical happens. As our natural rhythms become our norm, as we begin to be in sync with nature's rhythms, amazing things happen. It's like you need to load the car and it's not raining. You go to open the door and the wind dies down just as you're going to open the door. It's just marvelous. The critters around us don't invade our property. They don't eat from our gardens. They don't come into the house. And my favorite, this is when I began to be aware of this, is when we go outside and are engaged in this heartfelt ceremony. We've agreed to meet for a ceremony and we're going to be outside. The weather always complies. And we realize that we've begun the shift. And our lives, our inner lives and outer lives, are in harmony. And we find that deeper meaning, that truth, that we are one being, humanity, the earth, the universe, the cosmos of multiverses, all one. Thank you very much.